What's up YouTube? This is Chop Celery, and in today's video I'm going to review my Nervous Necromancer build in Dragon Age Inquisition, specifically for a Nightmare difficulty run. So in the build video I'll review the skills that I select, along with some pretty important passives that make this build viable. I'll go over some of my equipment, but just, keep in mind that due to RNG, or just, based off what you can craft, or what stats you want to give your equipment that best suits your playstyle, just go with that. And then I'll review my rotation, kind of just explain why I do what I do to make best use of any kind of synergy abilities, or just some bursting, like DPS burst that you can make use of with this build. I haven't seen a whole lot of videos just on this type of build, so I really at least wanted to review this and hopefully inspire others that almost every build you create in Dragon Age is viable, as long as you do think it through. Okay. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So with the specialization tree of Necromancer, I do pick up the 3 skills, starting at the top with horror. That's going to be a main bread and butter move of this build, just because it applies panic to enemies. So the upgrade I chose is terror. So enemies now that are panicked, at least from this move, they're going to be rooted in place until they take about 1/4 of their total health pool and damage. So that's pretty good in terms of a crowd control ability, just that way you really can lock down at least. I've been able to catch, I believe, up to 3 enemies in a horror move at once, so it's pretty useful. The second skill, Spirit Mark, I use this just as a damage over time. If I'm just, going to put it on an enemy and then kind of not pay attention to them anymore, just so I have some damage over time on certain enemies throughout the battlefield. I don't end up really caring about the spirits that fall, and, I don't think that they add enough to combat or are really going to make a difference. So that's why I just can't justify picking up an upgrade for that. For Walking Bomb, I really like this move. It's a main part of my rotation. So it is a damage over time, but the upgrade I have is concentrated detonation. So this is, if you manually detonate this move when it's on an enemy, they're going to take 900% weapon damage. So I think this is the main part of where our burst comes from, just in this skill tree alone. So for the Spirit Tree, we do pick up Barrier. Do pick up Mind Blast, and the upgrade for Mind Blast of Fortifying Blast, just because there will be times I'm sure you'll be caught in the fray, and using this move will just give you some barrier by 10% per however many enemies you strike with this move. So the most main important passive, out of the Spirit Tree would be Strength of Spirits, just because it gives your barrier 50% more. So we're working with a higher barrier, which for the next tree that I'll review for Immolate, the more barrier you have, your fire spells, so the only one I have here, Immolate, and the damage upgrade, your active barrier will be consumed by 50% of it, and that used to empower your next fire spell move. So that's why we wanted to have as high of a barrier as possible, so that way we can make best use of this passive. And then the other 3 passives I pick up, so Flashpoint, when you land a critical hit, your next spell cast, it doesn't trigger a cooldown. I've used this when I've done it with Horror as my next move, just because then that doesn't trigger a cooldown, so then I was able to use Horror on another enemy in the battlefield, just kind of rooting them in place. So you can get kind of creative with this passive, especially for crowd control ability. So Pyromancer, just this increases the fear duration by 25%. So I don't know exactly if that has an impact on how much health or how much damage that those enemies that are rooted in place due to my horror can take, or if it just extends the duration that they're in horror regardless if they take damage. So this one I'm still trying to figure out. Clean Burn, so whenever you do a spell, it's going to reduce the cooldown of your other spells, so it's just good for pumping out more damage faster, hopefully with not going through too much of your mana. I do pick up Energy Barrage, but I don't use it. I do like this move. It's a good damage over time, just because of all the little little projectiles that shoot out. So just in case you don't want to use Mind Blast, you can definitely put on Energy Barrage. That's definitely a good move. And then for The only passive that I pick up in this tree is Conductive Current, just because there are going to be a lot of times when you put out your damage over time stuff, or you do Immolate. You're at times you're not going to have a whole lot of mana, so I just wanted to make use of the points I had left. That's why I ended up picking up this passive. And then the last tree I want to review is Winter Tree. I do pick up Winter's Grasp and Fade Step. The upgrade for Fade Step I chose was Frost Step, so when I dash through an enemy, it leaves enemies chilled, so that way once I use Winter's Grasp, my enemy is already going to be chilled, so when I use the upgrade, enemies that are already frozen or chilled, they take massive damage when hit with Winter's Grasp. So another good burst combo you can do is Fade Step, get them chilled, and then do Winter's Grasp for 1000% weapon damage. So it kind of hits like a truck. The other two passives I pick up is just Mana Surge. So if you have a barrier that explodes because an enemy is attacking you, and you'll have an AoE around you of enemies that could be frozen, and your next cast, you can cast it without it consuming any kind of mana. So you freeze all the enemies that are afflicted by your barrier, you can just go ahead and use Winter's Grasp, and then they're going to take a massive amount of damage because they're already frozen. The only other passive is just Frost Mastery, so it just increases the duration for both freezing and chill, so that way it gives me a little bit more time to Fade Step through them and then to go ahead and hit them with Winter's Grasp. So, okay, so that has been my skills and some of the really important passives to pick up. Now let's move on. I'll just go ahead and show you some of my equipment. The weapon I'm using is Earnest Reprisal. I believe I bought this at the Black Emporium. I think I crafted the grip and the crest, I think just to give myself a little bit more magic, willpower, and attack percentage. So that's just what I preferred. And because a Necromancer is more of a spirit kind of build, I kept the Master Spirit rune that was in there, so just to add a little bit more spirit damage. So that is my main weapon, and then I am wearing this crafted chest piece, or just armor piece, excuse me. I give myself some cold resistance, just because going against those frost demons, they're a real pain in the ass, and I hate them. So I gave myself plus 23 magic, so that's just good for overall offense. 9% melee defense, just to beef up my mage just a little bit. And then I think the masterwork was abilities cost 7.5% less mana / stamina. So that's just good, so that way my abilities will cost less. Hopefully I can cast them more if I'm being smart about my mana management. So okay, that has been the build up until this point. Thank you all for watching. My name is Chop Celery, and now I'm going to turn it over to just straight up gameplay, so you can see this build in action on Nightmare. So just give me 1 second. Alright, so let's just go ahead and we're going to see this in action. Let me just quick verify. There we go. We are on Nightmare, and I do have a trial of even ground on, and that just makes sure the enemies are the same level as me, so just even playing field. Before we get too much into it, I do want to review my rotation before I jump into anything. So my rotation is always just going to be barrier to myself. It gives me, the extra layer of defense, and then that way I'm able to immediately use Immolate, because it draws, at least from that passive, it draws 50% of my current barrier to empower the ability, so it's just going to hit that much harder. And then I typically after that will do Horror, just to root the enemies in place. And my rationale behind that is I want to keep them rooted in place after I already deal a decent chunk of damage to them from Immolate, so that way now it keeps them in place and they have to take even more damage, so their health is just already going to be lower by the time that the horror effect ends. So that's my way of thinking, just in terms of why I have that part of my rotation. Now, depending if there are enemies close to me and I really just want to get away because I don't have enough mana, I'll just use the Fade Step. I'll just go through them just to do damage and chill them, and as well as just getting myself some separation. So depending on how much mana I have left after I do the Fade Step, I'll turn around and then I will just go ahead and do Winter's Grasp on them. So so far, I've seen it go anywhere from about 1,800 up to like 3,000, depending on the enemy that I've hit. So it's pretty decent burst, and Fade Step doesn't cost you anything, so pretty decent ability. And then from there, you know, if I don't use Fade Step or whatever, I'm most likely going to throw on Spirit Mark just to damage the enemy over time, and then if I have enough mana, I'm going to end up using Walking Bomb. Shoot that on them, depending on how much health they have. I'll wait to explode it, like to manually detonate it, because I want to get as many ticks of damage off as possible. But if they have, you know, pretty low health and I shoot on Walking Bomb, I may wait 2 or 3 seconds and then just detonate it, because they probably won't have that much health left as it is. So that is my rotation in and of itself. Excuse me. It can be pretty confusing, and that's kind of why I coined it the nervous Necromancer, just because you're probably always going to be moving. And you really got to make sure you keep an eye on your cooldowns, just because this build at least has been a little bit harder for me to manage. So now let's just go ahead and we'll see it in action. So barrier, it looks like there's a couple enemies up there, which is good. We will immolate. We'll do horror. See if we can catch. Looks like there's a stalker. Oh no, that's through. Show that guy. Bomb. 1, 2. Detonate it. Oh, it didn't kill him. Fade Step again. Whoop, missed.